thing. There's lots of information at that website. And if we decide to have more of these Zoom meetings, I'm sure we'll publicize it on that website. So be sure and look for that. Today I'm going to be talking about trees and different aspects of trees. There's so many different aspects. So I'm going to kind of give an overview of the importance of healthy trees in our environment. And also, I don't know where I got this slide. I think I'm kind of piecing together several of the best parts, the oldies but goodies slides of the trees that I've got. And this one was The Secret Life of Trees. And it says the tallest, most massive, longest living organisms ever to grow on Earth. And that's incredible. Here is Broad Street, 1938 in Chattanooga. And there weren't too many trees on that street. And then in 1969, of course, we were the most polluted city in the country. And then by 2010, we started to have quite a bit of greenery downtown. And now we're known far and wide as probably one of the greenest cities in the nation. And when you look at Chattanooga, tree canopy compared to other cities, we're doing pretty good, 50% of the canopy in Chattanooga compared to the national average. And the person probably most responsible for that is Gene Hyde. He's just retired. I went to his retirement celebration just recently, and he just retired. But look at that, 30 years ago, he started the Tree City, and he made Chattanooga designated a Tree City, USA, and he's kept that designation every year. You have to do certain things. You have to keep track of the trees and have a festival and all that stuff. But Gene's done that, and I hope we can keep on doing that going forward. And so let's just kind of look at some of the basics on what is a tree. It's a woody plant. It stands up tall. We say it's at least well, it should be 3 feet. Well, 3 inches at breast height. That's how they measure the trees. And it forms a crown, and here they say the height is at least 13 feet. But I've seen trees that are smaller than that. But that's just sort of a way to define it. Trees have all these benefits. There's just so many benefits that trees can have for our landscaping, for our cities, for oxygen, energy, prevent soil erosion, all that physical stuff. But also there's evidence that shows that people living where there's greener surrounding report lower levels of fear, violence. Greener building surroundings report fewer crimes, so that's pretty cool. Residents living close to green spaces enjoy more social activities, and they're a very fabric of a nice neighborhood to walk through. There's evidence to show that there's ADHD kids are helped by that. There's less levels of aggression were significantly lower among people. So all these things are kind of interesting to say how important trees are. There's green views, give better green spaces, makes life demands more manageable. And maybe in a time like we're facing right now, it kind of helps us just when we get out and walk around and see the trees blooming, gives us a little bit of hope that spring's here and maybe things are going to be much, much better here in the next few weeks. So, and here it says, a girl's view from home, the better she scores on tests of self-discipline. So there's been a lot of tests there. I mean, there's been a lot of research and things on trees and how important they are for a lot of aspects of our, and we can almost feel that these are true. Let's go into the structure of a tree. What does a tree basically amount to? And here's kind of a cross section of a tree. It shows that, of course, we kind of know that there's a big trunk of a tree, branches, and there's foliage and the roots. we'll get into this a little bit deeper. There's the trunk, and then you've got the limbs that go out. It just kind of goes from thick to thinner to very thin when it gets out on the twigs, and then finally the leaves. And the leaves are, I call the leaves are the solar collectors of the trees, because they basically, a lot of them can twist their little petiole. It shows right there the petiole of the leaf, that stalk, and often just turn itself just to face as much light as possible. And when you're talking about 100,000 leaves on a tree, it's pretty ingenious that a tree can kind of do that to absorb light and produce chlorophyll. That's what turns the tree green. And then you see all the veins and where all the water will go through, and all the food is created from the sun. So there's just a lot going on in just a small little leaf. I see Amy raised her hand. Amy?
Tom, we're having requests for if you can double click on the slide on the side, so it will expand the view for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, double click.
You can double click on that leaf on your side.
Let's do it. Try this way. That didn't work.
Okay.
Did it work?
Not really.
Huh.
Can you go up top and hit slideshow? You're on the home screen right now.
I'm wondering if I've got the wrong, oh yeah, slideshow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what?
From the current slide, the second thing over. Keep going. That, yes. You tap on that. It should.
Huh. Didn't do anything.
Okay. And what about double clicking on 19? Yeah, that long list. Double click on that.
Didn't do anything.
Okay.
Let's try this over here.
If you unclick use presenter view, because you're presenting to a different screen at your house, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, uncheck that where it says use presenter view, and then it'll present, I think, on just the screen.
Okay.
That's in the white bar to the right over the top of leaf morphology.
Oh.
Yes, right
Okay.
there.
Get rid of that.
Yeah.
I had that happen before when I had the others. I was trying to show a screen. Does that help anything?
Now click on from current slide.
Huh.
What about where it says present online next to from current slide? Maybe that would do something. It says present online.
Go back. Let me stop sharing a second and go back into another. Let me do this. Okay.
Tom, there's a button next to from current slide, and it says like present online. I wonder if that would do it possibly.
There, that's better. Whatever you just did, that's large.
Yeah, yeah. What happens is, yeah, anyway.
That's fine. Then you can just fast forward to where you were.
I think I'm, okay.
Yeah, that's much better.
Am I there yet? Am I at the right slide?
Not on mine, no.
Huh. Oh, there we go. Huh. Sorry about that. Screen 2. Maybe it's this one.
That's still larger than it was.
Oh, come on.
Then, yeah, down at the bottom, you can forward.
Yeah, I can't seem to move it. Hang on, screen 1 maybe. That's weird. Well, it was this is the one that worked, I think. Okay, maybe this one. That didn't work?
Yeah, it's advancing now.
Yeah. Is that big now?
It's bigger than it was originally.
I think some people have to make it bigger on their own screen. So now I'm seeing it on both of my screens. So this should be the one.
Yeah, this is better than original.
Yeah, this should be the good one.
You guys out there up in the top corner, you can also expand Zoom to be a full screen
Yeah.
and get rid of the chat stuff on the side.
All right, I think we're back. Okay, so the leaves can be, there's lots of different leaves in trees. They can be a leaf blade, can have one leaf, which is simple leaf, and then a compound leaf, maybe like a hickory or an ash tree. It could be several leaflets in each leaf. That whole thing is a leaf on the right-hand side there. And that's in the fall, that whole part will fall off, and that means it's a compound leaf. And then there are different types of compound leaves. Some of them have a little leaf at the very tip or a leaflet at the very tip, and some don't. And so lots of times you're trying to figure out what trees are. And there's books that you can get. Well, here's a picture of a double or twice compound leaf, where the whole leaf will fall off and it'll have several units of multiple leaves. Then there's palmate leaves that look like the palm, like a maple leaf or a buckeye, looks like that. Leaf arrangement on the other side, on the next one. Leaf arrangement, you see, there's some that are called alternate, means they kind of go up like stair steps. And then the middle opposite are leaves straight across from each other. That's one way to identify leaves. And there's only like 3 or 4 trees that have that opposite branching. And there's some that have whorled. Wherever you come up to a little spot, there's several leaves around a point there. So those are just real quick ways of identifying leaves. Here's alternate on the top. And there's a magnolia. It's alternate. Here's the opposite leaves. This is an ash tree, which ash trees are in the news these days because there's a insect that's killing a lot of the ash trees. Emerald ash borer. Then here's an opposite leaf arrangement. No, that's actually alternate. I don't know why they're saying that opposite. But in this case, there's 3 leaves produced at one node. And in this case, it's the pine. And if you look real close on that particular slide right there, you'll see that there's 5 needles coming out of that one little bundle. And that means it's a white pine. And then, of course, lots and lots of leaf shapes, different leaf types, and you can give them crazy names like obovate. But most of the time, that's not necessary for identification. It's nice to know all those things, and I took classes that oftentimes you forget those things. And then you get some books, and I was going to say that we have a nice little free book that UT has on the trees in Tennessee. And so if you want one of those books, either you could come to the Ag Center when the Ag Center opens again, or you could go online and order one. I think you can. But also you can go to bookstores and get just the trees of Tennessee. You can identify trees in the wintertime. In the summertime, they have different books. It's good to get one of these National Audubon identification type books. And I've also told people that if you find a leaf somewhere, a tree, you can basically Google images and start searching for, you could say, I've got a leaf or I've got a tree that has compound leaves, for instance. You could Google that. But then one of my master gardeners turned me on to iNaturalist. And if you haven't used that, and I haven't used it that much either, but boy, we were able to identify quite a few things. You can use that for trees, you can use it for insects. So I'd give that a try. The iNaturalist is, and basically use your cell phone, and there's an app called iNaturalist, and you just take a picture of it, and it's based on artificial intelligence. And she kind of made me a believer of that, and so I'd give that a try. I think I'm going to try using that more and more.
Is that only for iPhone users?
No, I think we found it's through, I think, National Geographic.
Okay.
Or one of those big outfits, and I think it's for both. Yeah.
I'll look it up.
And there's several of those kind of programs out there. But
Thomas Howard, they've got a website.
Yeah, I'm sure they have a website too. But anyway, that's something to check out if you're just never took a biology class or a botany class. You can almost get pretty good at that. So here's what we used to do in the old days. And you'd get a leaf, and then you go through a key, and the key you start out with number 1, and it'd either say compound or simple. So you go, and then you go to the next one, and it might say something like the leaf is got jagged edges, or it's entire. So you can see it's kind of difficult to go through this. If you go through, and sometimes you have to go through 17 steps to identify a tree. And if you were a botanist, I suppose, at university or someplace, you'd probably still do this. But for you and I, it's good just to take a leaf and take it into your garden center and say, what tree is this? Chances are they'll know, or at least they can go out to their tree yard and go down the row and figure out what tree it is if you're just trying to take a walk in the woods and learn your trees. Of course, the tulip poplar is our state tree, Tennessee state tree. There's 20 species of native oaks in Tennessee. And also UT has a nice oak identification booklet. So that's kind of nice to have a booklet. You can just kind of turn the pages and put the leaf up there. A lot of them are based on the points. The one that has the pointed lobes are all in the red oak family. And if the lobes are rounded, that means they're sort of in the white oak family. We're not going to get into identification, but I've given you some nice hints here so that you can probably jump right into it. Red oaks and white oaks. And then something nice to know about trees is how they respond. Right now we've got trees that are starting to early spring, the carbs, that means the carbohydrates are flowing up into the branches, and they're preparing for the leaves to come out. A lot of trees are already doing this. This can be a very fragile time for trees. Sometimes if we get a late spring freeze, all these carbohydrates, basically it's water and minerals and things. If we get a really hard freeze, which we did, I think it was 2007, It froze for 19, went down to 19 degrees for 3 days, and it just froze it because the water doesn't make it up into the leaves right now. It's starting to rise like straws going up into the tree. And if that trunk gets frozen right now, it could crack that trunk. And we'll show some pictures of cracked trunks, frozen freeze injury later. And then in the spring, as leaves start to emerge, carbohydrates are used for that. Midsummer, the tree is replenishing with all the sun and the photosynthesis. They're replenishing those carbohydrates. And by late summer, the tree is full of energy. And so that's what's going to get it through till next year. So then it drops its leaves. A lot of those leaves turn into fertilizer on the ground, and the cycle repeats itself. But you can also see in this little photograph, think about the drought and think about when that drought might happen. You know, right now we've got so much water in the ground that the tree is doing so good. Most of the trees are just loving all this water that we've had. You know, we don't care for, you know, it could stop raining, but we know it's going to get drier, and most trees are going to really enjoy that extra groundwater all the way through summer. And so I don't see right now, when I see a wet spring like this, it makes me feel better that the trees will make it. Trees have deep roots, or they have expansive roots. I'll show you what the roots look like here in a second. And they can reach out and get a lot of water. So it takes a lot of drought to hurt a tree. And then here it says in the winter, the carbohydrates actually go back down into the roots and wait there or used for root growth. And then they're ready to go up the tree again. So where do trees grow? I mean, there's several places where how a tree gets bigger or fatter, wider. One is in the roots. And as you can think of roots, if you ever pulled up a tree and saw the roots, if you looked real closely, a lot of times there's root hairs, and it's almost like the hairs on your arm or your leg. That's where the nutrients and the water is actually taken in. And then the water is transported through the veins that go up inside the roots and goes into the stems. And so the growth occurs at the very tippy top. And it also makes the tree or the branches wider, thicker. So you can see all the little pieces and parts inside of here. If you took a botany class, you'd learn all these little parts, but you can see that it is kind of complicated. So the roots are growing by the tips, and they're growing. It's very important to maintain good health in those hairs. If we get a drought, a lot of times those hairs will be the first things to suffer, and that's how a tree can die. If the root hairs are either too dry, or if it gets soaking wet for too long, then those root hairs will die too. They'll get rotted. And then right now we're seeing a lot of shoots. This is where we're seeing it. You can see inside it. Some people can identify trees by this picture right here on every tree. And so every tree has sort of the terminal buds and the scales, and that you can tell a lot of things by just how the tree was growing. You can look at this year's growth. You can look at 2 years ago. You can actually read into the tree. This is sort of the secret life of the tree. You can see where the tree was doing good maybe 1 year, and maybe 1 year it didn't grow very well. You can see, and the distance between those nodes can tell if that tree was healthy. A lot of things you can see here. If you were a fruit grower too, you could also see that some of these buds are going to turn into fruit. So the thicker ones, and it's not always predetermined. Many times it's the way the tree branches go out. If they go out real flat, that could determine how much fruit buds are made for those fruit trees. So it's very, very interesting on the. Now here's the roots. This is a good picture of what generally roots look like. When I was growing up, I don't know, I had a teacher that said, oh, the roots look like the tree, just like the tree up above, but that's not true. The roots below look like a pizza pie pan, and they go way out. They go maybe out twice or 3 times the drip line of the tree. And so they anchor the tree, they absorb water, they can reach way out, they store all those minerals, and they conduct water. And you can see here's an example of that, especially if we see a storm and we see a tree fall over, we can see that it's we can see that the roots aren't that deep, you know, maybe 2 feet, and they can penetrate. Around here they don't have a hard time penetrating too deep anyway, but they tend to reach out. That's why it makes it quite hard to plant other trees nearby, or even want to have gardens around trees. That's kind of a no-no in my opinion, and a lot of opinion, because the trees are going to suck all the energy basically, and you don't want to take a rototiller and go around trees like this. It could destroy that tree. Anchor, this is just all the things that they do. We already talked about feeder roots. Absorb. Roots are, I think, very artistic. You know, people, a lot of natural artists spend time drawing these beautiful trees. You can see it's not a reflection. It's a longitudinal type of situation. And the trunk of the tree gives it shape and support, and it's the beauty. A lot of us, or a lot of people, can identify trees just by the bark, just by what's on the outside. And you can sometimes see the health of a newly planted tree just by what it looks like coming out of the ground. So it forms a network of tubes. That's where, if you look at the tree from inside, if you could cut it open and look on the inside, there's all kinds of different layers. There's the outer bark. There's just under the bark, there's 2 types of cells. One is phloem, which is a term that all botanists need to know. The other one is, and that phloem actually brings the energy that's made from the sun, brings it down into the roots. It actually carries it laterally too into the leaves. And then there's a thing called the xylem, which is tubes again, but those tubes are carrying water from the roots up into the leaves. And so right in between those 2 tubes is a term called cambium. And a lot of people say, or kind of liken the cambium to kind of a piece of saran wrap, if you think about it, because it's so thin, but it's where new cells are being made. So, and so you can think of how fragile the tree would be if someone girdled the tree. If they like George Washington, you know, he took his hatchet and messed up the tree on the outside. And that's what can happen if someone ties a string around the tree. It's very quickly you can kill a tree just by strangling the cambium. Or if an animal comes along and chews the bark and gets underneath there, it hurts the cambium. It usually takes more than just a little nibble on the side. You usually have to take at least half of that cambium off to make a tree die, but it can happen. It can make them suffer. So underneath the cambium is sapwood. That there's some xylem there that carries it from the roots to the leaves. Then the heartwood is in the middle. And I've seen trees, if you go over to the National Cemetery, you can see trees with the heartwood is actually gone, It's just, sometimes it rots on the inside or decays, or just, I don't know, I must decay on the inside, but the tree is still living. It's not as strong, but the tree lives on that outer edge. It doesn't live on the inside. Here's another picture of a cross section. There's even a section called pith, heartwood, sapwood, growth rings, of course. Most people know that when you cut a tree, and every one of those growth rings means a year of growth, where the carbohydrates went up and down the tree. Here's one that's really an old tree. If you can, I don't know if you can see that, but the Black Plague, this is in 1347. I think I see that. Is that what it is? Yeah, 1347 was the Black Plague. I thought this was very interesting because of what we're going through right now. And that tree was living, that was a redwood tree living way back then. And kind of grim statistics of how many people died during that plague. But the tree lived through it. And the other thing, the secret life of a tree, you can tell what went on in the tree. You can see that kind of you can see that ring, but you can also see a spot where it says F. That was probably a forest fire. You can see where some of the rings are wider on one side. That could mean that it's facing south and the tree's growing a wider ring on that side. There might be some competing trees nearby, and that would make those rings thinner or wider. So there's a lot of things that can be looked at in the trees. And then flowers. Flowers, of course, most trees have a flower because they're in that flower producing family. Other than the evergreens, the pine trees, they're in a different category. But the flowers in a tree are just like flowers that you grow in the ground. They often have the male and the female parts, and the pollination. That's what we're facing right now. If you have allergies, the pollen's in the air and it's flying all around right now. I always hear that the Chattanooga Allergy Clinic says that Bradford pears are not what's causing our allergies. And so what is? I think it's probably either pine or oak trees right now. But there's a lot of things that are flying around right now. Some plants have separate sexes, so that some of the flowers only have the male parts, some of the flowers only have the female parts. For instance, crabapple, they have both the female and male parts on the same individual. There's a whole list of them: dogwoods, spruce, walnut. Whereas there's some that are dioecious, which means that they have separate. And the one that we know a lot is holly. When we buy a holly tree, we often are told that we need a male tree to go along with it. We'd like to have the nice, beautiful holly berries, but we also would like to just, so generally they'll try to sell us a male, which we probably need, but more than likely you'll be able to get the pollen from your neighbor's tree. If someone in the neighborhood has a male tree, you should be able to get good pollination from that. So that's really not always perfectly important to do that. But you can see a lot of trees are like that. Some of the fruit trees are like that too. So you often have to buy a male or a pollinator to make that work better. Here's maple, has female flowers and male flowers. And all this variety of seeds. It's just amazing how many seeds. I've got a collection of seeds upstairs that a gentleman who's a computer expert, Don Rima, he goes out and he collects seeds, and he just pastes them on little pieces of paper and collects them. where some people, and you and I probably in biology class, we had to collect leaves. Well, he collects seeds, and they're just so diverse. You know, some are built just to fly in the air with the wind, like the catkins, the seeds come off. Some are made to be eaten by birds and transported every place. You know, sometimes our invasive plants are notorious for being transported by birds or wind. Some are like the maple seeds that are flying, you know, they whirligig and probably just enough to get away from another tree so that they won't be inhibited by the tree. So there's just, and the nuts, of course. The nuts are amazing for wildlife, but the wildlife takes a certain number of those and buries them and starts a new population. So you can see the dynamics. Again, the secret life of a tree. We wouldn't know this unless maybe you read it in books, or if you, in the old days, people lived in the woods, or they got in the woods a lot more than we do. So when you're out in the woods walking, it's good to pay attention to what the wildlife is doing in interacting with the trees. So let's see, best management practices. Okay, now we've kind of done the botany, and so now we're gonna act like we just got some trees. And management is spelled wrong, let's see here, M-E-N-T, that's interesting. So we want to always start from the soil. When you take a master gardener class or a beginner class, we always say, start with the soil, trying to determine what the soil texture and the pH was, which is the acidity. Sometimes we downplay our clay soils, and a lot of times look around us and we've got some really great trees growing in our clay soils. It doesn't mean that we can't grow good trees in our soils, but a lot of times we have to improve those soils a little bit. We have to be careful on the trees that we pick. Some are better in those clay soils, others are not. pH, we have soil test kits that you can get and determine if your pH is in the right ballpark. Usually most trees like to have it a little bit on the acid side. Here they say, yeah, there's certain trees that, most trees like it a little bit on the acid side, just like most of our. And drainage. Drainage is really an interesting feature of a yard. If you go out into your yard and you want to know if a tree's going to grow, well, lots of times the way to do it is to dig a hole. And I was thinking about this last night. I was thinking, should I tell them to dig a hole with a post hole digger? And I know that's not a good idea. It's better to do it with a shovel. And then, because if you do it with a post hole digger, lots of times you're just making the sides of that hole kind of shiny, and then the water's not going to go out anyway. You want to kind of, if you're going to do this, you want to simulate how the tree is actually going to percolate into the soil. So you dig a hole about 18 inches deep. That's about how deep roots are going to go anyway. So then you fill up that hole with water. And so if you've got good drainage, in about a day, that water should be down. If it's fair, it'll be halfway. And if it's poor, maybe a day or two, and you'll still have water in that hole. So that means that there's a couple of things. One is you want to be careful planting in a place where it doesn't have very good drainage. Or you might want to consider mounding up a section right there and make it raised up. Sometimes you can grow trees in an area if you just put the tree up higher or keep the roots out of that wetness period. And then light exposure is kind of important for situating or picking trees. Most trees like it in full sun. There's a few that like shade. A lot of trees can get by or even do real good in partial sun, 3 to 6 hours. And there's a few, not very many, that we can choose for shade. We might get into some of those. And then of course in our area, we always have to think about slope and where the sun's going to be, or have good exposure to the sun, which is good. Another thing to think about on our hillsides are wind, because that can really cause damage to trees. If we already got a bunch of trees and we want to put more trees in there, sometimes that's a problem. There's a word or a thing called allelopathy, and that's when certain trees produce chemicals which kind of tell other trees not to grow here. There's the notorious one is walnut, black walnut, and I think butternut has some of those chemicals in there too. Somebody was telling me our magnolia keeps ferns from growing too. I have to check that out. But I'm sure there's a lot of dynamics that are going on with trees, especially the shade. The roots may also have those chemicals, but trees, growing other trees under the shade of a tree is kind of tough unless you can thin out the branches of a tree. And I often encourage people, if they have a tree that's very, very old and it's on its way out, that it may not be a bad idea to plant another substitute or a replacement tree to get it going, so that once that bigger tree dies and falls down, that the newer tree is got a 5-year head start or a 10-year head start. Hopefully that old tree isn't going to fall on the new tree, but sometimes you can get away with doing that. Maybe you can put 2 or 3 little trees around it in anticipation. I'm trying to do that with the big oak tree we have out here. Anyway, there's urban factors too. There's overhead wires. You want to pick trees that aren't going to grow into the wires. Some of the utility companies have a V cut that they do, but it's basically just trying to keep the tree, but it looks terrible. Doesn't look too bad in the summer when it's all filled out, but when the leaves aren't there, it looks terrible. And also underground utilities. There's many a story of people going out around their house and digging. Make sure you know where your underground wires are. You don't want to run into a high power line, but there's telephone wires, there's utility, there's gas, there's sewer pipes, all kinds of things to think about when and you can call, there's a number either called MissDig, or there's a phone number, phone number, and usually they come out for free and can do some kind of sonic detection of what wires are underneath the ground. So, and like your sewer lines too, you're not supposed to grow trees above your sewer line. I know a lot of people do, and they probably pay the price, especially if it's a tree that has a lot of invasive roots, like a willow tree. You don't want to do that. When you go to the store, you're usually going to get that one on the right, containers. And that's been a pretty good tree for most people. There's all these 3 types here: bare root, balled and burlap, container trees are choices. Generally, you're going to get the bigger trees with the ball and burlap. In Tennessee, actually over by McMinnville, they're known for their big ball and burlap trees. They produce trees that have ball and burlap that are, I don't know, maybe 5 feet wide. There's diggers that dig those up and ball and burlap them, and they sell them to properties, commercial properties, high-end properties. But I tell people that those aren't always the best trees, and actually I think they're usually not the best trees. You pay a premium price for those trees, but many times they don't plant them right. They put them in the ground. They can't plant them right because they're so huge. They can't dig the hole so big, and they just sit there in the ground. And so the better choice is either the potted plant, and I think even the bare root plant can often be the best choice. It's a very inexpensive tree. You can get a lot of different varieties. A lot of times you can the nice thing about the bare root tree is that it's inexpensive. You can buy 5 of them for the price of container plant, you can, when you plant those bare roots, they'll be in their own soil. You won't have to worry about going from the soil that was from the grower or the greenhouse and trying to make it work in your soil. Sometimes that's a problem if your soil is a little different. So, so I wouldn't be afraid to we were giving away trees just recently, just yesterday and today, actually. We've got a few trees left. So I think those trees are going to do fine. And in about 5 years, you won't even know the difference. The bare root trees can often surpass quicker. You just have to be careful with those bare root trees. From my experience, you plant them out in your yard and you forget about them. You don't put any kind of a orange tag or something that's going to keep you from mowing it down or string trimming it. That's one of the problems with those trees. But anyway, let's say you get a tree in, and they're trying to show the incorrect on the left and the correct way. The incorrect way, they probably used a post hole digger and they just they drilled a little hole in the ground and they didn't make it wide. They didn't take off the burlap. They didn't, what else didn't they do? They, there was ropes. I get that a lot from people. I always ask them, what kind of ropes? And they say, well, it looked like it was just a cotton rope, but it probably wasn't. It was probably some kind of polyethylene rope that's not going to deteriorate for a while. The other kind of picture I always talk to people, I say, think of Houdini. I mean, he could fall into water and get out of that straitjacket, but trees might not have the best way of doing that. So free up the ball and burlap, make it easier for that tree to get going and the roots grow. There's several things. Crossing branches, you generally don't want to prune the tree very heavily the first year, because you want to have all the photosynthesis you can muster to get that tree to produce good root systems. But get rid of the tree wrap that's tight. Take the labels off. Make sure the labels, you want to make sure you remember what tree it is. Often I'll take the label off the trunk and put it up on the limbs somewhere. If you leave it on the trunk, oftentimes that tree grows so fast that it strangles. Remember we talked about the cambium layer on the outside? We don't want that to happen. We don't want to use black plastic mulch. It smothers the roots. We just want to have it all like the other one on the right. If you're going to stake it, you want to make sure you do it right. Now, I would say 9 times out of 10, you don't need the stakes. That's just, you'll see that in pictures. You want to make it so that it's not going to be tight around the tree either, because very often that tree is going to grow faster than you think, and the next thing you'll know that rope that you put around the tree it's growing into the bark. So it's just a good idea. The other thing about this is use only existing soil as the backfill. Most people, and I used to think this too, you think, well, I'll just buy a couple bags of good peat moss and dig that hole nice and wide, put the peat moss in there and plant my tree right in that beautiful soil that I got from the garden center. Bad idea, because what happens when it rains real hard, it's going to just absorb so much water that it's going to rot all our little root hairs that we just talked about in our botany section. So you want to make sure you don't do that. You just mix it. If you're going to do, if you just put your natural native soil back, research has shown that. So there's a lot of old tales that have been done over and over and over again. You see it in the city. We're paying our government to do that, and we're sort of on a bandwagon to make sure we don't do these practices. I'm kind of going against this one. Well, when you buy something in a container, a lot of times you'll see roots that wind around, and they're showing the knife cutting down through there, and that's what you'll see a lot of landscapers doing, and it's probably okay. I like to take a little bit more time. I paid my $20 for this tree, so I like to just reach in there with my fingers and try to pull the roots out, stretch it out again like Houdini. Just make it freed up. Instead of cutting the roots, I just, if you can, just stretch them out as much as you can. And that to me, that makes more sense than to try to cut through. But the cutting is better than just leaving it, leaving it the way it is. Okay, here's another description of all the thing. I think it's almost the same thing. Take the tag off. I think we covered most of that. Broken branches. Yeah, you can prune out the broken branches. Take away the rubbing. If you see some branches that seem to be rubbing. Sometimes the very top too. If you're trying to get a fruit tree anyway, it's good to take out what they call the co-dominant. Pick a branch that you think is going to be the one that you want to be the top of your tree, and then kind of make the other one shorter, because if there's two that are sticking up there, they're both going to want to be competing against each other. That's just the way trees work. If you take one away, then the other one will shoot up much higher, and you'll get a straighter tree that way. Containers are kind of the same thing. And oh, the thing I didn't cover here, you see right where it says the flare, root flare, or there might be a graft. Some of the newer trees are grafted. A lot of the Japanese maples have a graft, and you can see right where the graft is. There's a lot of times there's just a little mark there, or an edging. But you want to make sure that you still have the flare showing on the top. And if I could point that, I could show you, but you can just, where that pointer is, you want to make sure you don't cover that with soil for sure. And if you're going to use mulch, make sure the mulch comes down. It's only 3 inches to begin with, but when it gets to the tree trunk, you want to end it maybe a couple inches away from that tree trunk, and so that the flare is still there. If you go out into the woods or anywhere around looking at good trees, you'll see all the trees have a nice fat part right there, the flare. If you got, but you also see some bad properties where they cover that up with mulch. Maybe they'll cover it up 6 inches high, and that's terrible. It doesn't seem like it's causing problems now, but over a period of 5 years, it's just going to cause rot right there. Beverly, you think we ought to just keep going? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think if you want to finish, there are a lot more of planting, and just finish the planting section.
Yeah, I don't know if people are taking breaks. It's different on this than it is. So here's a good look at ball and burlap trees. Make sure you get rid of all that twine, even though it looks like it would deteriorate. It might take a year to deteriorate. And you want to get it in the hole before you do that. You don't want to take it off and lose all that soil. So that's a good picture. So here's some of the fallacies. Do not add soil amendments. It creates difference in pore sizes. You want all the soil to be uniform. You don't need fertilizer at planting. It could burn the roots. And you definitely don't want to over mulch. It just smothers, it cuts off the oxygen, and rodents may get in that. You just want 3 inches, 4 inches at the most. And use, well, you could use a lot of things. I wouldn't use the plastic, the rubber mulch. That's not too cool. The stones, some people use that, but I don't think I like that one. Pine mulch, hardwood mulch, pine needles work real good. So there's a lot of good mulch things out there. And don't use tree wraps or stakes. Other things, Don't cut the tree, top it, planting. Just leave that tree, especially if it's a small tree, make it just grow real good that first year. Let it get established before you do too much to it. And try to remove that sod around there. Sometimes that sod is going to compete for water and nutrients, and just can be allelopathic, that word that we talked about, that's a chemical. The grass can actually give its own chemical to the tree and cause the tree to be stunted. But it's better just to pull that grass away from there. And also, that's why you use the mulch a little bit. Just a little bit of mulch keeps you from string trimming too close to the tree. You should never try to string trim and think you're so good. I see this all the time, especially around the ag center. They think they're so good that they can just tap that tree just a little bit and get all the grass without bending over and getting rid of the grass. Well, what happens is it's just like some people, if you tap their arm, slap their arm, they're going to get a bruise. So they're very sensitive. And some trees like Japanese maple, dogwoods are very sensitive. And if that string trimmer just taps the bark and it goes all the way around the tree, that tree will probably suffer, if not die, over a period of time. It could kill it in 1 year if it hits it too hard. Don't ever let a string trimmer get too close to trees. It's kind of the same. So here's a real tree sitting there, and it looks pretty good. Only looks to me like I don't see a flare on the bottom. And it depends what type of or time of year this is. If this is early spring, it looks pretty good. If this was going into summer, I'd think maybe that tree is suffering. And sure enough, you get too close, and there's the roots right there. We opened up the mulch a little bit and saw that the flare was way down there, and the first roots are 6 inches deep. Wow, that's terrible. So that means that tree is a goner. It doesn't look like it, but it's just smothering the ground. Right there is where all that water, remember, all the water is coming up from the ground, especially in the spring. And there's lots of water in there. And if you smother it, it wants to breathe, and it's just going to start rotting right there. So you really want the roots only to be a couple, maybe just, you could look underneath the mulch and the roots should be pretty close to the top. You shouldn't have roots showing, but you want to just cover them with a little bit. You don't need them that deep. That's another picture of that. Of a little dogwood. And that's what could happen. That tree was probably growing pretty good, and you can see the crazy volcano mulch that they put around that. And so that's what happens sometimes in a windstorm. You get a rot right there, and the next thing you know, you've got a tree that's fallen over. If you didn't do your due diligence when you planted that tree, this happens usually from a container plant that didn't have their roots stretched out. Ball and burlap, not so much. Bare root, not so much, because it's in their own soil, but you should always keep a lookout for this. And you probably need to have an arborist, and our arborist is a trained tree guy, tree girl, lady, to come out and manage that. You can play around with that yourself, but I think I would get professional help to try to free that up. There's a certain time when you can do it real good, and there's a certain time when you shouldn't be messing with it. But it is going to strangle that tree over time. The trunk's getting bigger, and the root isn't going to go anywhere either. So there's ways to free that up. Here's staking a tree. We said it's not necessary. You can have, this is a bad result that I see over and over again. Lots of times when I'm at a restaurant, I'll go around looking at their landscaping, and this is a very common thing that you see. You see that the restaurant paid to have somebody install the property, installed the trees, and they put up a lot of stakes, but then there was nothing in the contract that said they had to come back and take everything off. You can see how fast it indented. I'd say in about a year. There's a hose right between. Pruning issues, watering issues. If you're going to water trees, and you do need to water trees, usually the rule of thumb is the first 2 years of a small tree, you need to look at it at least every couple days. But you don't have to water it every day. You have to use your finger to see if it needs water every day. And if it's dry down, push your finger in there. And if it's dry below, maybe down to 2 inches, then then it's time to water. Now, that's one nice thing about the mulch. The mulch will keep it moist for a longer period of time, even during the heat of the summer. So you may have to pull the mulch back a little bit and do the finger test just to see if it's wet there. And then once you learn your soil, once you learn how fast your soil dries out, then the idea is to water 1 inch per week. And the way to do that is just have a slow trickle of water, and do it once a week. Just act like a rain. It's raining. When a rain happens, usually it's 1 inch of water, and it just takes a while and it soaks down and percolates into the ground. If you just go out there and water just a little bit every day, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to wet the grass, or you're going to wet the mulch, and then very quickly it'll just evaporate. So you're not going to get any water down to the roots. And here's a symptom of, you could look at that and go, wow, it needs water, but maybe in your own mind, you've watered that a lot. So you stick your finger in the soil and you realize you did too much. So that's why you need to know your soil, use the finger test, and if your finger comes up with mud and it's too wet, even after a couple of days of poor drainage, then you know that, hey, I need to stop watering. Maybe I just need to back off on the watering a little bit. Maybe I planted it too deep. So there's a couple factors there that you can, if you planted it and it happens this way, a lot of times, even after a year, you can maybe raise that tree up, dig it up and raise it up a little bit, make it higher on the ground, and you might be able to save that tree, unless your whole property is underwater like this. And here's the mulching. See how that mulch is, maybe it's a little thick on that right-hand side, but at least it tapers down to nothing as it gets real close to the tree. And you can see the nice flare at the bottom of that tree. So that's a good way to do it. And that's not a good way to do it. So, and we see that all the time, don't we, in Chattanooga? And it's done by some landscapers that should know better. I haven't figured out their names yet, but anybody who's in the business should know not to do that. I've seen it at commercial properties. I've seen it at Erlanger Hospital on Gun Barrel. I've talked to those people, and they seem to think that that's the way they want it done. But whatever. I don't see that too often, but you can see already that there's some cracking going on in that tree, and that's probably related to not only moisture cracking, maybe some sunlight there too. And a lot of times when people see that, they think, well, that's probably what should be done, but that's not what should be done.
Crazy.
What's that?
That's crazy.
It's crazy, that's for sure. Fertilizer. Okay, new plants usually don't need any fertilizer. There's usually enough stuff in the ground that should make trees grow real well. And a lot of times it's good to kind of watch, you know, if the trees gets a nice start growing, it's not going to be because of lack of fertilizer that's going to keep it from growing. And so after a year or so, then when it does start growing, then that's the time to fertilize. Spring before the plant grows. I don't know about that. This might be an older slide. I've been learning that often it's good to fertilize in the fall, especially fruit trees, because that's when the tree is, especially your let's say your major elements. Nitrogen, you might need a little bit of nitrogen in the spring, but most of the time it's good to get your nutrients in there, especially phosphorus and potassium in the fall, so that it works its way down to the roots and gives you a good root system, so that when spring does come, that the tree will be ready to grow. So, but I think you couldn't go wrong if you, I'm talking about the ideal time, maybe in the fall for a fruit crop. And and it'd be the same thing for trees too, for a flower or a nut crop on your walnut trees or something like that. So, but early in the spring would be fine if you thought you needed some fertilizer. And a soil test, if you took a soil test anytime prior to, let's say you did the soil test before you did the trees, that's a good time to do it. If you forgot to do it then take a soil test and see what your pH is, see just what the general nutrients are in the soil. Like I said before, a lot of times our clay soils are just full of minerals. We don't have to add too many of the extra fertilizers to those soils. This is how pH affects it. You can see that the lines are tapered at the tips. That means when the pH is very low, that means it's very acid, then the nutrients aren't available when that line is really skinny. And also at the very top. I don't know if I've ever seen soils at the very far end over there, 9.5. But most of our plants like it right there at 6.6 and 6.5, right in there. If we were growing blueberries, which aren't trees, or azaleas, maybe we'd like to have, they like it down in the 5s and 5.5. I'm trying to remember what hemlock. I think hemlock is a more acidic type tree. But most of our trees are going to do really well in 6.6 and 6.5. So if you saw one of your trees, if you planted it and saw it turning yellow like that, two things as a diagnostician to think about. One, check the soil. Make sure the soil isn't either dry or too wet. Here they've got sort of a rain bag around it, a gator bag they call it, where maybe they're trying to get that tree to get through the drought. And so they fill that bag up with water to get it through a hot summer. And that's you see the city using those occasionally. You got to make sure you don't run out of water. But those are a good idea. It can be a good idea. But if you see a tree that's been watered properly and everything's doing good, but it's still turning yellow, then maybe there's a nutrient problem there. Maybe it could be a pH problem, or maybe it's just temporary. So a lot of times you have to watch it for a whole season to see if that isn't something that's just, I won't say natural, but maybe it's just, it's a young tree, it's acclimating to that site. In this case, next to a parking lot where they might have put a lot of cement chips, the cement and the extra stuff is very alkaline. And so that's one of the things I'm observing here. And or the right, it's not a tree, but that's an azalea, which are known to be, they like it more acidic. So maybe the soil is more alkaline there. Let's just plow through these. I mean, this is all interesting from here. A lot of time, well, a little bit of pruning. How do you prune? You want to make the branches strong. Sometimes you would like to prune, but my recommendation is to prune when the tree is dormant. That's usually going to be late winter. Early winter, you're taking a chance, or early or late fall, because we could have a warmer, a warm up. And then when you prune, anytime you make a pruning cut, you're going to stimulate that tree. You're going to stimulate that tree to grow a branch somewhere else. So if you do that, and you grow a branch somewhere else, and we get into a freeze on new growth, then that's going to be a problem. But if you wait till maybe, I always think probably late January, February, pick a nice day, go out there when you can just, it isn't blowing real hard, not windy. We get a lot of beautiful days to prune in the wintertime here. If you're going to prune now, you can, but still you're going to get a lot of new suckers and other growth. But it's not bad to get rid of some of the problem branches, dead branches, get rid of the low-hanging branches if you're always going around with your lawnmower and bumping into that. Widowmakers are branches that are way up high in the tree that are just, maybe from a storm, broken branches that could fall on you and be very dangerous. So the idea with any trees is to try to develop a good angle. The one on the right there is the angle is not wide enough, and you see the tissue isn't very strong. It develops this dead tissue. We call it bark inclusion. So bark is right in there, and then in a really windy day or a storm, that branch will go off. And think of this as two trunks. Sometimes trees end up some way with two trunks, and so that can be a problem too. So you want to try to, when the tree is small, it's good to start developing its branch attachment. And where to cut just outside of the collar. We talked about the flare at the bottom. That's a nice term to know. But here up on the top, the collar is a fat part that's just outside of the trunk. You can see where that's fat all the way through there. And you can see where they made the red jagged or the red dot cut there. It's not very, and it's actually the smallest circle that you can make without getting into the tree. If you went any further closer, it would turn into an oval. But try to make it as much of a circle as possible. You can see that on the right-hand side, they did a good job. And chances are, let's see, yeah. And you can see what happens. There's a trick to cutting off a limb. A bigger limb is always cut a little bit on the bottom and then cut on the top. You get rid of the weight and then come back and cut it right where it needs to be. So the 1, 2, 3 cut. Ever listen to John Nessel? He'll tell you how to do that. You can do that with a chainsaw or just a regular handsaw. But that makes it, if you started out doing it right at number 3, what would happen? It would just it would grab a hold of that bottom and it would peel the bark right off the tree. There's the 1, 2, 3 cut. And you can tell, again, the history, the secret life of a tree, there's a lot of things here. You can tell if it's callousing. Trees don't heal, they compartmentalize. And so they grow this callus tissue. All that cambium tissue is just growing fast when you make a cut. And you can see if you did it good and it responded good, you'll see a nice circular spot. And that means it's healing, or it's growing over, it's healing properly. Let's see. Now a rot, sometimes if it isn't healed properly, a rot can get into that cut, and you can see it starting to go down. callus tissue and a hardened layer. Let's see some of these other pictures. The tree is defending. You know, this could be an insect wound. It could be a hail damage. It's just sealing off. It's trying to seal off that damage. And that's where we talked about way back, where you could see the life of a tree from a fire. The tree is going to respond to a disease sometimes. It's going to be hard to come back from that, but that's a pretty common sight. There's so many better ways to do it. You can come in there and take certain limbs off instead of just topping. This is just called topping trees. And the mulch is too high on that one too. It's probably better just to take those trees out, although it probably would cost another $1,000 to go from there to there. But that looks terrible. I don't think you'd get a very good monetary price increase on your house if that happened. But basically they're trying to keep, but the thing about this is the tree might grow back and all the limbs that'll regrow will be very skinny, very, very thin, and they'll be a hazard to your house. Probably in the next 5 years, the limbs will be high enough to cause damage to that house, and they'll have to come back and do the same thing again. So you might as well pay now or you'll have to pay later. Looks like a mimosa. You can see how the rot that got in there and just the ugliness of doing it that way. You see all the new growth is just very, very tiny, and it's not going to get much bigger. And if it does get bigger, it's going to also be a hazard. And just so many buds form. The tree's shape is pretty well gone, and the value of that tree is gone too. Of course, you've probably heard of crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtle trees. And here's why you shouldn't top a tree. Instead of topping it, you know, properly pruned, they're thinning it. They're thinning out the weakest branches, and they're just, yeah, you can see they're on both of those. They're just properly pruning them. They're maintaining a natural shape. If you top the tree, all it does is make more small little branches come in. There's a mechanical injury, probably a mower or a string trimmer started that damage right there. Looked like it was planted too deep at one time. And most of the time it's going to stay with the tree for the life of the tree. Tree wraps can be a terrible thing. This is what happened this last year. We had a lot of evergreens showing right now. I got more calls this year from arborvitaes, green giant arborvitaes, than I've ever gotten in all my years that I've been here, 16 years. And it was because of the same scenario that's happening this year. We had a beautiful spring last year, lots of rain, and so the tree really got a good growth. It was growing lush. And then what happened is that as the summer went on, it got really dry and really drought. And I think the tree just reacted terribly to that. And so they just went from lush growth to drought. And so the term that I learned this year, it was new to me, it was called flash drought. So that it was the rapidly changing thing, the abrupt changing. Vertical cracks, sunspot, primarily on the south and the west-hand side. A warm spell in January, I don't know if we had that or not. We often do get warm spells and cause the trees to bring dormancy and sometimes causes a freezing injury. And of course, the cracking can be really mess up those xylem and phloem things that are going up and down, the tubes that are going up and down the tree. Frost cracks. This is what I fear sometimes at this time of year, but I don't think we're going to get it this year, is a late spring freeze that can cause that. Sun scald. Often if trees are thin bark like maples and dogwoods can sometimes have, if they're just in the right spot, the sun can shine on that bark and really expand it and contract it and make it very, very weak. So what do? You can put on a light wrap around there. You could paint it white with, there's tree paint, or you could just put a temporary, just during the heat of the day, put some kind of a sheet on there. That might, I don't know if that would look ugly or not, but I think either that or you could put 2 stakes in the ground and put the sheet up there. Maybe you could put it, maybe make a windsock or something to keep the sun from just beating on that bark. It's hard to repair it, but it's a wound. It's hard to heal those longitudinal cracks. And here's some ideas. I got some loose wrap for the latex paint. And here, I've never done this, but I'm sure you could do it. I guess I've done it sort of that way. I don't know if I've used a chisel. I just kind of carved out the loose bark. That's always good. And see if the tree can callus over. It's better than maybe trying to, I'd give it a try, especially if you've got 10 years invested in a nice tree and that happens, car backed into it or something like that. Then lightning strikes. I'm always puzzled by lightning sometimes, but you can look around and say, oh, is that the tallest tree around? And that's usually the case. For no reason, that tree either loses its leaves or dies. But if you look around and it's the biggest tree in the area, at least in that small area, then probably lightning is and a lot of times you'll see a longitudinal crack, not always though, but it's a sure sign that that's lightning. And birds can definitely do, woodpeckers and things like that. Surprisingly enough, the one on the right is a yellow-bellied sapsucker woodpecker. It's a small one. And so the one on the right, I usually tell people there's not going to be any problem with that tree. That tree will probably do quite well. I mean, it'll still do okay. And it'll live a long life. I don't know about the big holes from the pileated woodpecker. That would be, that probably means the tree's dead, dying anyway. Here's they call these lichens. And a lot of people think these are killing the tree. They're not. They're just, they're saprophytic. They're not parasitic. Saprophytic means that they're just growing on the tree. They're taking up the nutrients. And chances are though, they could mean that the tree is suffering from something else, either from drought or too much water. The lichens are just I learned something though from one of my interns. I always thought it was an algae and a fungus kind of wrapped up together. But he told me that it's also bacteria. So it's a bacteria, algae, and a fungus kind of in one plant. It's considered a plant. And they're beautiful in my opinion. There's lots of different shapes and sizes of lichens. I was told in classes that they're a sign that the air is pure, the air is good, got good air. If you didn't have lichens, it means there's a lot of sulfur in the air, a lot of sulfur dioxide from cars and stuff like that. So there's some more. Tree decay from fungi. What do we got here? Oh, this is probably herbicide damage. Yeah, if you're putting on weed and feed in the next few weeks maybe, and you discover that maybe this is happening to trees, It could be bad, or it could just be temporary. A lot of times, if you put on a weed and feed on your lawn on a hot day, it volatilizes and gets into the leaves, and you'll have leaf curl. The chances are the tree won't die. It'll recover. Maybe some leaves will drop, but the trees will recover. Let's see. Oh, now if you're going to get into landscaping and design, this is a good way to look at where you want to check out smaller trees under power lines. There's a lot of little hints and things on here. Healthy trees can protect a building, and you can save 7%. Here's the Arbor Day is a good place to get some information, where you can decide if you're going to use a tall tree, a medium tree, and a small tree. Most of the time, we probably need to look at the medium and small trees for our smaller lots. If we plant some big oak trees, they're good, and it might take them 50 years, but the people, I've had that experience. I'm the 60-year owner of the tree, and they don't do so good when they get in a storm. On the west wall, it'd be great if you could do that. One way to kind of get an idea, not always, but to see what's growing good in your own area. Go to garden centers, read books, go to third Saturday classes, see what's growing in your neighborhood. And maybe you can see what's growing in your neighborhood, and if you don't like it, if it's too plain and not too diverse, maybe take a chance and pick some trees that are not so typical, and maybe the garden center person will say, give those a try, because there's lots of trees that we aren't using that can be put into our yards for wildlife, for lots of different things. A lot of times it's for aesthetics or for art. Different trees for different places. Site evaluation, below ground, make sure you know where the power lines are. Make sure you want some trees that are going to give you shade or just enjoyment of color, different things. Slope exposure, we covered some of this. Like I said, I combined a couple of different things. Urban factors, vandalism. Sometimes planting too many trees can be a little bit scary if you're in a area that you want a little bit more visibility to your house. So you want to take that into account. Sometimes maybe you just have to limb up some of the branches to give more visibility. Sometimes regulations, there's some regulations, I think in Chattanooga, for businesses anyway, they have to plant a certain number of trees if they're putting in a property. For certain commercial entities, they don't want their signs covered. They want their security lights to not be covered. So it's good. It's nice to just when we get into design, maybe we'll cover, where your house is, where the morning sun comes up, where the sun goes down. You want it. I always like to have my bigger trees on the west side of the house, so that that afternoon sun can be brutal in Tennessee. It's nice, in the morning sun. It's nice to have that morning sun come through a small tree can make it over. So there's lots of things to consider landscaping as far as where to put trees. There's lots of nice plans that you can come up with. And sometimes if you just bring your picture of your house to a garden center, they'll kind of sketch out some of the trees that are pretty good. This is amazing here. There's 688 tree species native to the U.S., and we've got 235. Tennessee is known as probably the most diverse state as far as trees I think it's in the world. I know it's in the United States, because we have the north and the south combination, and our climate can grow so many different plants and trees, especially. Let's go through some of the decisions. You might want to pick a tree because it has cool bark, beautiful flowers in the spring with dogwood, beautiful fall color with maple, just all kinds of textures, fragrances, to have some of those different ones. You want to think of life expectancy, get away from Bradford pears, calorie pears. We'd rather that didn't even start. Does it meet the, you know, do you want like the multiple trunks? That kind of lends a nice friendly atmosphere for coming into your property. Maintenance. Don't get into the bamboo tree business on the right there. That can be nasty. But you might want to get into the I don't know what's it called on the bottom there. You might, where it's high maintenance, but I can't come up with a word. You might not want to do the what is all my tree memory?
Sweet gum.
Sweet gum. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. The sweet gum balls. I got those all over my slip on slide all over those. They're a beautiful tree, but you probably want to have them the right tree in the right place. And then of course the fruit and different things. I guess we aren't going to worry about too much, but we do have evergreens. And if it's a wet site, the ones we've got outside, the bald cypress trees are tremendous trees. In fact, I don't know if those were balds. That looks kind of like it could be a bald cypress right there. It's an amazing tree. We've got one outside our egg center I can see right here. That grows in the dry, and it also grows in 2 feet of water. It's just an amazing, beautiful tree. And it grows up nice and straight to about 50 feet. And then you might want to have the wildlife, or you might want to have something that's a little bit not so wildlife prone. Ornamental value, life expectancy, just all kinds of things. Here, this picture shows dogwood, and dogwood has had problems in the past. There's been some dogwood anthracnose, but they've pretty much got that problem, I guess not solved, but at least better, where there's resistant varieties, in other words. The native dogwood is really hard to grow these still, but if you, with all the crossing and ways of producing new material, there's some beautiful dogwoods. Now here's a couple of slides that show that, yeah, natives are great, but there's also some natives that we have to take a second look at. You know, the hemlocks, the eastern hemlock they call here. We're having problems with hemlock willow-delgid, some of the beech. There's some beech bark disease. There's, of course, Dutch elm disease and chestnut blight, emerald ash borer, and some of the other problems with viburnum. And we'd like to stay away from hackberry, although there's some good things for hackberry. Sometimes it's not the best tree in our yard. Box elder can harbor the box elder bugs, you know, so if we make our houses tight, we could still have box elder maples. And so there's different things. Sometimes it's up to us as our homeowners to choose trees that we want. Sometimes we want to select plants with some fewer problems. Sometimes those are natives, sometimes those are cultivars. And so my take on it, I think, what about natives? Sometimes they're better adapted, not always. Sometimes they're pest resistant, not always. I like to look to natives first, but then don't be a kind of a purist. You can be if you want, but I like to say that there's so many trees out there that may not be natives, but they're still trees that can be of extreme value. Of course, we don't want to pick either one, a native or a non-native that's invasive. That can be a detriment. But we certainly want to pick a lot of the fruit trees aren't native. A lot of our maple trees, our Japanese maples, they add beauty and really nice atmosphere to our house. All the dogwood cultivars. I've got another slideshow that shows just about every tree that we have. Red buds, there's probably 50 different colors and shapes of red bud. There's probably, there's just so many different ones out there. And some people say, well, they're not natives, but still we can have quite a few natives, and we can also plug in our good trees that have been developed through research, and maybe they're good trees for our atmosphere. Here's getting a little history. Here's our Bonnie Oaks willow tree that's standing right outside our ag center. It's on its way down. If you look up in the very top, if you come over and see our beautiful garden the master gardeners are doing, you can see cables up in that tree. We actually lost a huge limb. You can see it right there. This is a fairly recent picture. And one of our master gardeners turned it into a nice bench. But I'm guessing, I thought the tree was going to be gone 16 years ago. By now, we've had some great storms, but that one's still standing. It's probably what goes way back to the Bonnie Oaks orphanage back in the day. Here we took a trip to New Zealand and saw this kauri tree. I'm just showing some of our little, when I was up in Nashville, let's see, it was probably 15 or so years ago. 4 of us up there lost our dads about the same time. And so we said, let's plant Cryptomeria. That was sort of a tree that people were recommending, and we were recommending it too, because it was sort of a replacement for Leland cypress. So we went out and bought container plants, and we thought we planted them far enough apart. Maybe we did, but it looks like we planted them maybe a little bit too close. They're still got some separation, but I think I took this picture maybe 5 years ago. But you can see, you can dedicate trees. I was thinking, should I promote that? And I'm thinking it's kind of scary to just say, I'm going to go buy a tree for somebody, loved one, and plant it. Chances are it may not grow. And then what? Then you feel bad. So if you're going to do that, make sure you do it on property and in land that maybe you have a good handle on, and just work it that way. Maybe donate money to a botanical garden, and maybe you won't get a tree with a sign on it, but you'll at least get some satisfaction that you were part of that garden. So be careful on that. I had an ancestor up at the National Cemetery, and this was a grand old oak tree that was growing. And I used to go up there for, 15 years. And a couple years ago, I was trying to find the marker of my great-great-great-great-grandfather. And I took my brother, he came down on a trip, and I said, I know right where that marker is. It's right next to that big old oak tree, almost up at the top of the hill there by the flag. And we looked for 10 minutes before I realized there wasn't that tree there anymore. There wasn't even a stump. They had come in, the tree had fallen down. This is what I was seeing years before. I said, well, that tree isn't going to be long. But just like our Bonnie Oaks oak tree, I thought it would be there for longer than that. But it fell over, and I didn't get a chance to get a chunk of wood out of that. It would have been nice to have that as a dedication. Let's see. And that's it. That's it for the day. Boy, appreciate everybody's. I guess we had 71 people. That's pretty good. I didn't beat Carlton. I think Carlton had 75 live last month, but 71's pretty good. There might be.
It's pretty awesome for Zoom that we have this many people.
Yeah, we might have doubles at some of the. If you had 2 people at your computer, make sure if you want to. What I was going to try to do is see if this poll works. Can you see that, or do I have to launch it?
There's nothing yet.
Let me launch it.
Yes, popped up.
Does anybody see that?
Yeah, it's on top of everything, so.
See if you can see how many people can figure that out and answer those questions. there's only two questions really. One question is just estimate how many new things you learned today. Maybe, maybe you learned how to plant a tree or how to diagnose things. You know, if you learned 4 or 5 ideas.
Yeah, I was able to click and submit.
That's good. Wow, look at that. Wow, I might be able to keep my job with this.
If anybody's got questions, if you can.
The second question is estimate how many of these things are you going to plant a tree? Are you going to take that wrap off your tree? Are you going to do something that we talked about today? Are you going to prune it better this year? You know, those are things. Right now you're learning stuff, but it's also nice to make that vow. It'd be nice to come back, I don't know, after the summer and say, did you do that? But we can't gather 71 people and find that out. But whatever you say that you figure you're gonna plan on doing it, plan on using the knowledge, change your behavior, you know, don't fertilize unless you have to, stuff like that. Well, that's good. 47 hours. Figure that out.
Hey, Tom,
Sure.
this is Howard. I'm in that intern class at night. And
Yeah.
I know that you and a lot of other folks have had to work awfully hard to rise up to the challenge of continuing this program in the difficult time we're in. And I, for one, and I know I'm confident I speak for probably all of us, we really appreciate the effort that you've gone through to help us continue and complete this process. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that, Howard. Yeah, thank you. We all have to kind of dig in a little harder. And I'm hoping did anybody answer the second question? Make sure you answer that. I didn't look and see. Yeah, that's good. Give some examples of what you plan on doing. If anybody plans on planting a tree.
It's Tom, this is Donna McGrath. It didn't open up when I clicked on it for me to enter anything. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't either.
The other thing, I have a comment. My neighbors have really old oak trees.
Uh-huh.
And the city, they're in the Lupton city area, and they're planning on doing some sewer improvement. And one of those things will involve running new pipes, which will deep trench through their yards.
Right.
And I was talking to them about how that would almost guarantee the death of their oak trees.
Yeah.
Is there any, do they use an arborist in those kinds of situations to help the homeowners? And if it's 125-year-old oaks, these are massive. The expense that they'll be left with to take those down when they die, which of course won't show for a few years, but it's more than likely going to kill them.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it a lot of times. When an older neighborhood in St. Elmo where I live, we're putting in a lot of new houses in between the old houses. You know, they're filling in the old lots, and that happens. They put in a new sidewalk, and it's not funny, but it's expected. I don't know if there's a lot you can do about it. You can ask, but they'd probably want you to pay for special drilling underneath the big roots. If you could get it down, if you could keep it away, at least 20 feet away from the tree. I think Gene Hyde, some kind of, and I think that was what it is. You don't want to have it 5 feet. You don't want to have the lines running 5 feet from the trunk. But 10, 15, 20, the further you get out, then try to go under. Depends what kind of line. If it's sewer, that may be a little bit harder. If it's like an EPB line, or you might be able to shove it through. They've got some diggers. Yeah, it's something to stop and say, how to do it. There's no guarantee that it's going to work. If you're just doing a one side, that's a plus. You may be able to survive if it's only on one side. But if you're a new construction and you're doing it on two or three sides, then it's really harder to make that tree survive.
Okay, thanks. I'll try to keep advising them. So
Then you might want to consider new trees. I mean, how to take that tree out before it causes or could be in a situation for damage.
I mean, the effect of trenching around the root systems and then causing the death of the tree is pretty well documented. I just think what I feel bad for is these people, when it happens, these people are going to be left with the expense of taking out the trees.
That's right.
And I think that needs to come back to the city. That's my point. I don't think those homeowners should be left with that expense because those trees were healthy at that point. Maybe they just need to get health certifications for their trees before the city starts doing what they're doing.
Yeah. I have another example of that when I give my tree talk to master gardeners. I have I show a new subdivision where there's, you know, a new subdivision goes in. Often the most expensive lots are the lots that have these magnificent, nice trees that the guy saved. And then so a young couple goes in, buys that lot thinking they've got this beautiful oak tree. And then 5 years later, it's the same thing like you're saying. They're paying $3,000, $4,000 to get rid of something that's dying on them because there's no way that thing's going to survive after all that construction. No matter how much they did, it'd be very difficult. Are there any questions? Does anybody want to open up their mic? All you have to do is push your mic and ask a question, and we can see.
Hi there. I have a question.
Yeah.
This is really great information. I really appreciate you giving all this today. This has been really great. However, I live in an apartment in Chicago. So I wonder if you could say a little something about small trees that you feel do well in containers. I do live in an apartment, but I have a giant west-facing balcony, and I have tons of plants out there, but I've been interested in adding a small tree to that for a container.
Yeah. Gosh, there's quite a few. Japanese maple, you could get away with that. You'd have to have maybe a 18-inch container.
Okay.
There's some small little fruit trees that people have these days. I've never really done much of that myself. I see them. There's a lot of things going on with dwarfing. You know, dwarfing.
Right.
A lot of times they don't turn out to be as dwarf as you like. But you could probably get into palm trees. That's always, that's something people don't think that you can do in Tennessee. But we've got the tallest palm trees in Hamilton County on the outside of our building right here. And the reason they do so well here is because our building isn't very well heated. It's got massive blocks in this old orphanage, and they heat up in the wintertime. But they radiate the heat out there, and the palm trees are now up to the 3rd story, and I'm sure they get heat. They've gone through several. They're about 20 years old now, and they've gone through several deep freezes. That's the only thing I can think of is the radiating heat is keeping them from freezing. So, but there's a lot of that. There's a lot of curious trees that if you bring them in, you could get into the tropical type trees if you'd like to do that, bring them in and out. There's a Norfolk Old Island Pine. We've got one of those. We got one of those given to us. We're babying with that. Do you know what that is? Norfolk Island Pine?
I don't think so. Maybe if I saw it.
That's the college. It looks like a little pine tree. It's the old college tree that they can keep in their dorms. Or,
okay.
It's just it's a cute little tree. You can use it as a Christmas tree in the winter. It's just, but you can put it out in the summer in Tennessee, but you can't leave it out all winter. And I don't know.
And Amy, some folks have also typed suggestions in the chat for you.
I've seen them. It seems like a lot of people have little fig
Okay.
trees. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for all this information.
You're welcome.
One more question.
Yeah.
Yes, Tom, I had a question about your fruit trees, male and female. How can you tell if your tree is a male or a female?
Well,
Just lift the leaf and look.
that's right. Well, it's you know, if the flower gets pollinated, then it starts to turn into, you know, that little, underneath the flower, you'll see a bump. You know, it's like a baby bump, I guess. And so I don't know if you can tell early on. I think you probably could if you're really skilled at it. But you know, the male will have the stamens, female will have the pistil. The pistil is usually just one, well, it could be several, but usually one main thing that's like a little sticky thing on the sticky part on the top. And when the pollen lands on that, then the pollen grows down into it and fertilizes the egg inside of the pistil, and then grows into a fruit. So yeah, there's certain stages where you can, if you couldn't tell, I don't know if you could tell, okay, the way that it's hard to tell is in ginkgo. Ginkgo, you'd like to have a male ginkgo. Okay, so it's hard to tell if you've got one, if it's just a stick, if it's just a seedling coming out of the ground. I don't know of any way that you can tell. Maybe this is the answer to your question, but you won't know until it either doesn't or does produce fruit. And we've got one out in the Bonnie Oaks Garden, which is here at the Ag Center, and it's a female, and it certainly produces a lot of fruit. And if you've ever been around ginkgo fruit, they are stinky fruit. They stink like vomit, I think, or dog doo-doo. But out there, it's not. It's a learning experience for kids when we take them out there. I get them nearby and I tell them to smell the tree. But you know, to have that in your yard, maybe not so good. But they're a beautiful tree. Ginkgos are just wonderful. But I think, don't they have a bunch of ginkgos up and down Broad Street or downtown? And they're probably, I haven't checked it out, they're probably not female so much, else they wouldn't like that. Good.
Tom, we've had several questions about planting trees right now. Obviously,
Yes.
we're saplings right now. So what's the best practice for spring planting?
What's the best
Practice for spring planting?
Yeah, put them in the ground, get them, you know, get the ground prepared. And what that means is, you know, loosen up the ground, get it, you know, you don't need a lot of preparation, basically. It'd be nice to know what the soil test is if you need to, but if other trees and other plants are growing good in the area, you know, you probably don't have to invest the $15, you know, I shouldn't say that, but a lot of times you just want to get the tree into the ground and then make sure it doesn't dry out. That's the biggest thing. Make sure it doesn't get string trimmed, but just make sure it doesn't dry out. Keep it watered, keep all the grass and stuff away from it. And it should take off if you can get a tree. Either right now you're either going to get one from I don't know, Reflection Riding had some trees. Most of the time people bought these trees, I think up till March they got them. We gave away probably 700 trees in the last 2 days. But in the old days, this was 5 years ago, we actually, I don't know, somebody gave us some money and the Soil Conservation Service paid for it. And then we gave them away. But this last tree giveaway was people paid $4 or $5 or $6 for these trees. And then they showed up at we were a distribution site. And so then we gave them out that way. So if you're looking for that next year, look for Tree Day. Tree Day is a statewide, maybe a national-wide program that you can buy the trees online and then they're delivered to your area. But they're trying they're trying to plant like 100,000 trees today. Today's tree day, I guess, for Tennessee. So, and there were some pretty good choices this year. There was elderberry, there was hazelnut, there was staghorn sumac. There were some ones that I would, they were all natives that they were distributing. You might still see some that other groups sometimes do that. Any other questions?
All right. Thank you very much, Tom, for all your work on getting together.
Yeah, I've got the poll, I got the chat. I can save that.
Yeah, everyone else, if you couldn't do the poll, it's fine to just type something in the chat. Just tell us kind of what you learned or what stood out to you. It'd be great for Tom to hear. Thank you for your time this morning being here, for sure.
That was great feedback. I appreciate that.
And then again, just look for emails in April. We hope to set up a few to replace the time at Expo and set up some classes that way.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
So,
a few glitches, but we got through it. I appreciate that. It helps to have a helper.
Thanks.
I think I get in trouble when I have the screen up here, because I thought there would be 2 or 3 people that would show up, you know, just because they didn't get the word, but nobody did. But they might have, but I had
Thanks, Tom.
yeah, thank you. I had a couple master gardeners out there kind of keeping people out of the room.
gotcha. Well, save that if you want to down in the corner. It's up to you.
Want to close the meeting?
I think we're good.
We're done with
Dropping down. Everybody's dropping down to 35.
99 comments. Wow. Yeah. It's going to take, yeah, I won't be back in the office until April. They're shutting down the Ag Center.
Yeah.
Something like that. Oh, yeah. How do we, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I got a very good tape.
It'll take you quite a while to
Download
convert it to a file.
Yeah.
And that's a 2.5-hour recording.